welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 363 for the 4th of October 2015. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. A warming up, heating up, temperatures rising. Oh, that was an old show. Sydney, Australia. Summer is on the way. It's practically here. People are at the beach today. It was only a couple of weeks ago. It was nice and crispy cold. Well, you didn't tune into the Skeptic Zone for a weather report today. Coming up on this week's show, a bit of a short show this week. It's a holiday here in Australia, the long weekend they call it. I've got some things to do. I'm off to visit my mother. So a bit of a shortened Skeptic Zone. Nevertheless, I hope you find it interesting. And this week we have an interview with a really, really fascinating man from Israel, Ran Levi. Now, he is an author. He's a podcaster, mostly in Hebrew, but recently he's taken up producing a new podcast, Curious Minds podcast. And in an interview, I chat to him about all sorts of things, why he put the podcast together. And we sort of ramble a bit and end up talking about Uri Geller, another famous Israeli, and free energy. And you'll find out more about this new and very interesting podcast. So that's this week's episode. We also, of course, have a week in science from the Royal Institution of Australia. Before we get stuck into the Skeptic Zone, don't forget Susan Gerbeck is in the country at the moment, and she's already been giving some talks for our friends in Victoria. And to let you know, of course, she's coming to Sydney. She'll be here this Thursday. Skeptics in the Pub on the 8th of October at the Crown Hotel. For those people in Sydney, please come along. It promises to be a very interesting night. And then, of course, she'll be speaking on the 11th of October at Stratton's Hotel, just around the corner, for those people who know Sydney. And it's an afternoon event, an afternoon with Susan Gerbeck talking about how to edit Wikipedia and some of her skeptical adventures. Go to meetup.com/AUST skeptics for more information. And not to be outdone by us Sydney folks, the people in Canberra will be having a special guest speaker, Joe Nicol, who will also be appearing at the Australian Skeptics National Convention. Get your tickets now. Just Google Australian Skeptics National Convention, Brisbane. Can't wait to see you there. Just look for the Skeptic Zone table to meet me, Maynard, Aran, Sagiv, Heidi, Joe, and as many other people as possible we can fit in. But nevertheless, as I was saying, Joe Nicol will be speaking in Canberra on the 22nd of October from 6 p.m. till 7:30 p.m. at the Copland Theatre, Building 25, Kingsley Street, ANU. Now, it's only $5 to go along if you're not a member of the Canberra Skeptics, or if you are a member, it's free. You might want to join up on the night. Canberra Skeptics is delighted to present a Q&A with one of the leading figures in the skeptical movement, Joe Nicol. Joe has been called the modern Sherlock Holmes and the real-life Scully. A very entertaining man, a very interesting man. I suggest that you go to www.canberraskeptics.org.au for more information on that event. Oh, that's enough from me. I'm going to run downstairs. Well, I'll let you in on a secret. I am downstairs this week. In fact, I'm recording to you from a microphone sitting on top of Fred's cat post on a box. Fred is behind me on the footstool, looking a little bit worried at what I'm doing. Hello, Fred. I digress. I'm not going to run downstairs because I am downstairs. I'm going to walk over to the kitchen, which isn't far from here. I'm going to have a nice can of root beer, which I bought the other day. A bit expensive, but hey, why not? And then I'm going to open up this box, the microphone sitting on, and make myself a waffle. How about that? While I'm doing all that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. me now all the way from Israel. Now, we don't chat to many people from Israel, so I'm delighted to catch up with Ran Levi from a little place called Atlit, which is near Tel Aviv. Is that right, Ran?
Israel is a small country, so everything is quite near to Tel Aviv.
I imagine you're right. I didn't think of it like that. Coming from Australia, of course, where everything is a 3 days journey by jet or something like that. That's great. Now, the reason that we've hooked up with you today, and as I told my listeners at the top of the show, you're behind a relatively new podcast out there called Curious Minds, and this is the podcast for science, technology, and history. And there are some episodes up there already, and I was on a bus the other day, and I thought I'd better listen to one of these episodes, and I listened to the one about World War II and the U-boats. What a fascinating podcast that was, talking about science and history. It was very interesting. What inspired you to get into this podcasting, and why did you choose this angle? I mean, we all already have online some other episodes you've done about X-rays, which I'm looking forward to hearing too, and currents, why we used AC and DC and all these sort of currents. What's the inspiration behind all this?
First thing the audience should know is that Curious Minds, which is an English language podcast, is actually my second podcast. My first podcast is one called Making History. It's in Hebrew, and I've been doing Making History for almost 8 years now. And Making History is, as much as Curious Minds, about technology and science and history. So Making History has been on the air for like 170 episodes.
Not bad.
All dealing with subjects from the history of science mainly, as well as a few skepticism subjects as well. And the reason I chose those subjects is mainly because, let's say it's because of two reasons. First, I'm an electronics engineer in my profession. That's the background I'm coming from. And technology and science is something that it's been fascinating for me since I was, a little toddler. And the second, I think, is that people often don't realize how interesting science and technology can really be. It's not about just facts and maybe explaining, dry subjects in science. There are a lot of interesting and dramatic stories behind those subjects. Much like you mentioned the episode, Curious Minds episode about the War of Currents. The story of why AC was chosen over DC as a method of delivering electricity to our homes is actually a very dramatic story of a fight between Nikola Tesla, the famous Serbian-born scientist, and Thomas Edison. And it was a bitter fight, and people may not even they might not even know about that dramatic story. So for me as a storyteller, describing that kind of a vicious fight, and it was vicious, a vicious battle. And actually, the first, I don't know if the audience is aware of that, but the first electric chair in the United States was invented as part of Edison's attempt to show that AC electricity is dangerous. so these guys invented the electronic chair. So there's a lot of very interesting and dramatic stories, and I think that's probably the reason why Making History is I'm happy to say, very successful in Israel. We've got almost 50,000 or even more than 50,000 listeners per episode, which is quite a lot for a small country such as Israel.
It is. And I'm pleased that you reminded me, of course, and I should have said it at the beginning, that the Curious Minds podcast, by the way, folks, that's at www.cmpod.net. That is in English, which is a great help for people like me because my Hebrew is quite limited, I'm ashamed to say. Shalom, that's about it, I think. And it wasn't...
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah, is it? That's Hebrew, is it? I don't...
Yeah.
and I was very interested to hear the one episode I've heard, and I'm looking forward to the others because I thought it was so well produced. And I was just having a little chat to you before we came on air right now, and how important that is to get your production up. But the lady you had reading it had a lovely speaking voice, and she was a pleasure to listen to. Technically, how do you go about recording your podcast?
This particular episode was recorded in a professional studio, a radio station studio in Tel Aviv. But I also got a second narrator. Her name is Kelly. She's based in the United States, in San Diego. So we're actually producing an episode with her is a bit more complicated. We're recording at her. She's recording locally, and I'm recording locally, and we're talking via Skype. Which means the sound quality is fantastic, yet the interaction between us two hosts is rather difficult. So I had to rewrite some of the episodes that I wrote initially to fit to a more, let's say, less interactive version of the two hosts. So I chose some sort of a different format for the show, one in which Kelly and Shoshi are the leading hosts, and they narrate most of the show, and me and I appear as let's say I think the best analogy is when you're seeing the news, right, on the television, the nightly news, and then the reporter comes on. He's probably somewhere else. He's not in the studio. So the interaction between the reporter and the anchor of the news show is not immediate. The audience doesn't expect them to be in the same place.
Right.
So I chose that format. I'm as if I'm in another studio, in a different studio, which means I get to play some funny games with the format. As, for example, one future episode will be airing it next week. Mm-hmm. It's as if I'm in a stables.
Right.
And our podcasting studios have stables, and I'm with a horse, probably on a horse. Of course, it's all fictional, but it's nice.
Well, yes, I know you can have a lot of fun, of course, when you're doing the production, as I do on the Skeptic Zone. Sometimes I take liberties, and it's all theatre of the mind. I know that, but to my way of thinking, and I'm glad we agree on this point that it's good to have a good technical standard to a podcast, so it's not a chore to listen to. But and then the content is so important. What made you choose the topic so far? I mean, we have an episode there on X-rays. I'm trying to find out why you chose the topics you did.
It's a great privilege, since I am the producer of the show and I was the one who started it. I get to choose whatever is interesting to me.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling.
Exactly. And I've got no producer over me that's maybe overruling my judgment.
It's nice, isn't it?
It's a fantastic feeling. So in Making History, which already has 170 episodes, as I remind you, I got to do episodes which are widely different from other, I think, more mainstream science and technology media channels, such as National Geographic or Discovery, such as maybe I did an episode on the history of LSD, which is a touchy subject. People take it quite seriously. And I think most of the things that I said in those episodes would probably not be aired on a mainstream channel, because I talked about. I didn't take LSD in the show. I mean, didn't take LSD literally, but I didn't approach the subject of LSD from the immediate viewpoint of LSD being bad. It's bad. Right. So you can't say good things about LSD. But it turns out, have a great potential to dealing with PTSD disorders and OCD disorders. So you got to mention also the good stuff.
Right.
And,
Well, of course, that's very important. Yeah. Now, just as an aside, what is the URL for that particular podcast for our Hebrew listeners?
It is ranlevi.com, RANLEVI.com. It started as my own little show, so it has my name on it.
Well, I'll certainly
you can't change it.
I'll certainly put a link to that in the show notes together with the Curious Minds.
And actually, in continuing of the previous question, I also got to deal with several subjects which are very touchy, in the sense of religion. For example, I'm an atheist and a skeptic, of course. So I did an episode on the literal truth of the Bible.
Oh yes.
Israel's got a large percentage of the population which is religious. And when I talked about the Bible and how most of the stuff written in it is not literal truth, it's more mythical stories. Mm-hmm. And that episode got many, many responses and comments, and some of them were quite angry because people take it indeed. And I don't think the mainstream media ever touches that subject in Israel, since it's a sensitive subject. Many of the viewers and listeners might oppose this kind of conversation. But being an independent podcaster, I can do whatever I like. Same as the podcast I did about Uri Geller, which is a very famous Israeli-born
we know Uri,
magician, who says he has unnatural powers. But many people in Israel don't get to hear maybe the other side of the conversation, I think, in the mainstream media.
Now, that's an interesting point, and I'm glad you've raised it, because, I mean, the skeptical community have known of Uri Geller for forever. It's part of the folklore. It's part of why we're here. And when you study his methodology and what he does, it's sort of drifting into history a lot. Now, when I bend spoons like Uri Geller, because once you learn, it's not too hard. I find it fascinating to do, because when I do it, I get two reactions. The first reaction is from older people who remember Uri Geller, who are fascinated to see a spoon bending trick. And the second reaction I get is from mostly everybody else who have no idea what spoon bending is and have never heard of Uri Geller. What's the situation in Israel? Is he still some big mythical character?
Oh, very much so, since he's Israeli-born and an international celebrity. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, the knee-jerk reaction is to be somewhat proud of a guy like Uri Geller. He came from the same city I was born in and started as a regular Joe, almost as everybody else, and became an international star. And it's a source of pride, I guess, for many Israelis. He's better known probably than many of Israel's Nobel Prize winners. Sad to say, but it's true.
You'd be absolutely right. But in a way, I can understand, because when somebody from this country makes it very big internationally, like Hugh Jackman, for example,
exactly.
then we're all so proud of him, and he's great, and he's idolized and all the rest of it. So, in a funny sort of way, I can see that. But I'm interested to know that he's still very well known in Israel, because the rest of the world, I think he's largely forgotten now.
Yeah, he did. In Israel, about 5 or 6 years ago, he had somewhat of a comeback. He started sort of a late night show, entertainment show, finding Israel's great next supernatural psychic.
Yeah,
and I think this same format was later exported, I think, to an English version, but it started in Israel. And so he did a great comeback, and he is I think a household name in Israel. Sad to say, but really not many people know about James Randi, for example. So that's why I did the episode that I did was on the story of Uri Geller versus James Randi. I named the episode Uri Geller versus James Randi And I pitted them one against the other, since they do have a long history of rivalry between them, personal rivalry.
Yeah.
So that was a dramatic story which pitted Uri Geller. I think it's not very common in Israel, but it's you can't say the bad guy, because it's not an Hollywood movie.
You didn't idolize.
But he's not the hero. Yeah,
you're not the hero. I know what you mean. You didn't paint him in this great glowing light. Yeah. Interesting. Because I've had a few private chats with James Randi over the years on the topic of Uri Geller, and one day, many years down the track, I might write some of those out. He certainly has some interesting thoughts on Uri Geller.
Yeah, the rivalry between them was I think mythical for the skeptic. The skeptic history. James Randi was one of the first people who revealed the hooks of Uri Geller on air in Johnny Carson's show. I think it was in the 80s or late 70s.
Yes, even the mid 70s. That's when Geller was really burst onto the scene. Was the early 70s.
It didn't affect his celebrity status.
No, it didn't. Well, there we are. There's a great episode for our Hebrew listeners to certainly catch. What an interesting story that is. And I was also interested to see, when I was just having a quick browse around your website and some information, that you're an author, and you have written a book on a subject I find fascinating, and a subject that comes up here for the Australian skeptics quite a lot, surprisingly. And this is perpetual motion. What an interesting topic! What can you tell me about some of your discoveries? What can you tell me about some of your researches into perpetual motion?
Okay, so just to clarify for listeners who might not be familiar with the idea, a perpetual motion device or machine is a machine which doesn't need external source of energy or any energy at all to do useful work. Think about a car without fuel. It can run without fuel.
It fuels itself. It
fuels itself. So this idea of a machine which needs no energy, a perpetual motion machine, is something that inventors dream about for really literally thousands of years. The first ones that we know of are from India more than 1,000 years ago. So it's a history. It's a subject with very rich history. And it fascinated me when I was a student in the university, in Israel's Technion University, learning electrical engineering. And I came across one or two articles about machines and electronic equipment, which is supposedly perpetual motion device. I mean, something that doesn't need batteries or something to work. And it fascinated me personally. And and I've always been writing, for myself and short stories, etc. So I said, you know what? Let's try and make it to the big time and write a whole book, which is it's not an easy project, about the subject of perpetual motion machine, because as you might guess, there's a lot of inherent drama in trying to do something which is impossible. It is impossible in scientific sense, yet inventors. It's a very elusive kind of being impossible sense. For inventors, especially guys who are gifted mechanics, yet don't have any real scientific education. For them, it seems as if it should be possible to do it. It should be.
He's absolutely right, and we get the same people in Australia.
That book was published probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm still getting every year at least 3 or 4 letters and mails from inventors. And I actually visited one inventor in Tel Aviv I think 2 months ago, and he invented a car which needs no fuel. Ooh. It runs on it's a classic.
I want one.
And it runs on hydrogen. He has a small battery, which transforms hydrogen to oxygen and transforms water into oxygen and hydrogen. And the car runs over it, over that two chemicals. And of course, he has to refill it he has to refill the water every several days. But he's sure, he's totally convinced that with just a bit of tweaking, he might be able to run with 1 liter of water forever.
Wow.
And it's amazing. He's not a charlatan. He really believes that.
You're absolutely right.
I talked to him. Yeah, he doesn't do it for money. It's for himself.
Yeah.
And of course, creating an engine that runs on hydrogen is potentially very dangerous since hydrogen is very combustive. Yeah. And actually, his wife told me that she once started a motor on some, I think it was a shopping center, a parking lot, and it stood there for probably 2 or 3 hours. So a lot of hydrogen accumulated in the engine. So when she started the engine, it gave such a large bang that everybody in the region they thought it was some kind of a disaster or something.
Wow. But not a good thing to do in that region.
Yeah, that's why it's probably quite dangerous. But the stories that I found during my research on the book are fascinating. And the balance is probably 50-50 between real inventors who had good intentions and are really trying to create something which they think is possible, to the other population of charlatans who prey on investors. And I think this is probably the most interesting aspect of these stories. Because you've got many, many charlatans who take advantage of people who have lots of money and sometimes really want to use that money to help humanity. And of course, there isn't, I guess, a much better gift to give humanity than an unlimited source of a machine that can do unlimited work. And those stories are fascinating. I mean, I found things that I never knew existed, even in the 19th century, such as maybe you've heard about John Kelly. I think his name was John Kelly, who was very famous in the late 19th century. He invented a device which runs on he said it's cosmic energy.
Cosmic
music,
energy.
I think.
Yeah. Sounds good.
This one is quite popular even today. It's called now, I think they call it now vacuum energy or 0-point energy. But that's what he called it back then. And his machine attracted many people, and he got investments in millions of dollars, which in the terms of money from the 19th century is probably tens and thousands or hundreds of millions of dollars from investors. And just after he died, the day after he died, when the inventors ransacked his laboratory trying to find the secrets that ran all the machines, they found a huge container or a gas balloon of gas, a container which contained condensed air, which it was huge. Was it like a ton or 2 tons of condensed air just underneath the floor of his laboratory? And that condensed air, pressurized air, was actually what drove all those machines.
Oh, dear.
People were so depressed. I mean, untold sums of money.
Yeah, well,
gone.
I mean, it's so interesting to hear you say this, because this is mirrored with experiences we've had in Australia. And not so many years ago, and Skeptic Zone listeners may remember this, we were reporting on a Mr. Rossi who invented something called, I believe, the ECAT. And one of our investigators here in Australia, Ian Bryce, certainly was involved in this country in any way in trying to put it to investors, the reality behind all this stuff. Have you come across Mr. Rossi and his ECAT?
Yes, of course. Facebook is rife with mentions of him and his success, and I've gotten I almost weekly I'm getting somebody sending in an email. What about Rossi? Maybe he's real. And I mean, my guy, since he doesn't publish almost really anything substantial about his work with the ECAT, except when he needs probably to raise money from investors or something, I can't really tell what our claims are. He probably didn't invent anything new. It doesn't feel. You don't get the same feeling as a scientist who invented something new, since he's very secretive, and he's got that angle of the establishment is going against.
Of course, the conspiracy theory always comes in. Yeah.
But it is an interesting story. So maybe when we hear something more in the future, more substantial, I might make an episode of Curious Minds about his story, because it is interesting.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will certainly put you in touch with our chief investigator, Mr. Ian Bryce, because he has been investigating free energy, zero-point energy, over-unity energy, all these terms, for the best part of 30 years, I think. And he has a lot of information about his investigation, so I think that might be good. Well, listen, Ran, it's been really nice to meet you and to have a chat with you for the Skeptic Zone. Folks, that website, which I can recommend, the podcast is great. I've just subscribed, in fact. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the episodes. That's Curious Minds, and that's at www.cmpod.net. And I think you'll agree with me that's a fascinating show. And the episodes are about 45 minutes long, so it's a good episode to listen to while you're commuting or running around the block or something like that.
Thank you. And the future, I can already reveal to your listeners that future episodes in the next couple of weeks will deal with the history of poisons, which is fascinating from historical and biological subjects, and also digital information preservation, which is a topic not many people understand yet, its importance. I mean, we all take pictures and videos, yet they don't understand, I think, the challenges of keeping them for the next 100 years.
I think
our grandchildren.
I think you're absolutely right. Subject. You're right, because about 10 years ago, I was very much into making videos on mini DV tapes, which was the great technology of the time. And now I've got all these tapes, and I can't access them. So it's true.
At least you're not the BBC, the British BBC, who invested 100 or 200 million pounds on Laserdisc technology, which went bankrupt 2 years later.
Oh, boy. I remember those. Ran, it's been a great pleasure. And once again, folks, www.cmpod.net. But for now, Ran Levi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hello, Richard and all the listeners of Skeptic Zone. My name is Ran Levi, and I'm the producer and co-host of Curious Mind. It's a podcast about science, technology, and history at www.cmpod.net. Each episode will bring you interesting stories from a wide range of subjects, from physics to astronomy and medicine, from arts to science fiction. We strive for the highest production values both in content and in delivery. We already have on the air episodes about German U-boats in the Second World War, about the history of X-rays, and the war of currents between Tesla and Edison. Come and have a listen. www.cmpod.net.
Welcome to A Week in Science from RiAus, bringing you the science you need to know. Diets seem to fall in and out of fashion on a regular basis, making it hard to pick fact from fiction. First, let's look at the intermittent fasting principle, which inspired the popular 5-2 diet. Basically, you eat normally for 5 days of the week and eat just 500 to 600 calories on the other 2 days. That's equal to just porridge with fruit for breakfast and vegetable soup for dinner. Studies using rodents have shown that a restricted calorie diet can help increase lifespan, protect against cognitive decline like dementia, and possibly protect against diabetes. But these results haven't been shown in humans. In fact, a 2011 UK study found that intermittent fasting showed no greater weight loss or health benefit than a normal low-calorie diet. Fasting also tends to make people overeat on normal days and can lead to side effects such as dehydration, extreme tiredness, and anxiety. Next, let's talk about the popular juice cleanse diet, which was the second most Googled in 2013. The idea is that you just drink fruit and vegetable juices for up to a week, aiming to detox your body and kickstart weight loss. It works out to about 1,000 calories a day, making it another starvation diet, which accredited dietitians think are a terrible idea. Juice diets also claim that liquefying your food helps you to absorb nutrients more easily, giving your guts a rest. There is absolutely no scientific evidence to back these claims. In fact, juicing eliminates valuable antioxidants from the fruit skin and removes fibre, which is essential for good digestion. And now, 4 diet detox facts. Australians are expected to spend $6.6 billion on the weight loss industry in the 2013-2014 financial year. There is no evidence that detox diets do anything. Our liver, skin, intestines and kidneys already filter waste products effectively, making it a bit of a sham. A 2007 study found that nearly 30% of food ads carried health claims that weren't allowed under current food standards. And beware, almost anyone can claim they are a dietitian or nutritionist in Australia, as they're not legally protected titles. If you want a university qualified professional, look for an accredited practicing dietitian. That's it for this week in science. For more information on diets and detox, go to the RiAus website, riaus.org.au. Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. I'm Kieran Groom and we'll catch you next week.
Are you tired of waiting for the end of the world? Is the grey nano goo coming for you? Or are you just annoyed by those hordes of undead, or the colour of the moon, or even swarms of assorted biblical insects? Could that silly movie 2012 actually have any basis in reality? Or will the machines rule us all? For these questions, a fun weekend and more, come to the New Zealand Skeptic Society 2015 Annual Conference, Christchurch, 20th to 22nd November. Evidence shows that we even have some real scientists speaking on fantastic topics. When the echoing hoofbeats of the 4 gender-neutral equestrians of the apocalypse ring out across the world, where will you be? Christchurch, New Zealand, 20th to 22nd November. Apocalypse how? After all, we're the go-to place for natural disasters. For further details, visit conference.skeptics.nz. New Zealand Skeptic Society is a charitable organisation that exists to promote critical thinking. The devil is not real.
On maynard.com.au, it's time for Tim Ferguson's Right of Reply.
Don't expect too much.
You know those people who are wearing the V for Vendetta masks?
Anonymous?
Anonymous. They call themselves Anonymous, which really should be calling themselves... But they had to actually put a label to it. Look, anonymous people, this is great. And good on you for carrying on like a pack of 14-year-olds in your bedroom who are having a little tantrum about the things you don't like. Good on you for hacking. Good on you for downloading. Good on you for doing all the things that decent people regard as, mildly annoying and naughty. The fact is, if you are going to stand up, if you are going to protest, put your own personal name on it. Otherwise, shut up, because nobody needs to worry about something called anonymous. It's not like you're ISIS walking around in a whole bunch of black masks. You're just a bunch of dweebs banding together, hoping that wearing a V for Vendetta mask is somehow threatening anybody. A protester puts their name on it, otherwise they go back inside and do their homework.
That's Tim Ferguson's Right of Reply, letting you know what's what for.
That said, I think Natalie Portman's just wonderful.
Don't expect too much.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone this week. And in the coming weeks, it promises to be a veritable plethora of interviews. A plethora of interviews? A gaggle of interviews? A group, a collection? A submission? I'm sure you can come up with something better than that, folks. Not only will we be chatting to people at Skeptics in the Pub when Susan Gerbeck comes to visit in a few days, we'll be heading up to Brisbane in just 2 weeks' time to be at the Australian Skeptics National Convention, and imagine all the wonderful interviews we're going to be getting there. Maynard will be running around with his microphone, Joe and Heidi as well. It promises to be a fantastic weekend. I hope you'll be there. Again, just Google Australian Skeptics Convention in Brisbane. There'll be links on the show notes to get your tickets. Eugenie Scott will be speaking, Joe Nickel will be speaking, and a host of interesting skeptics. Well, I think Fred's woken up again. Hey, Fred. I'll get him, folks. I'll get him. Come on. Here he is. Well, Fred's the sort of the cat that doesn't meow on cue, but he might sniff the microphone. Yeah? Come here. I'll put you down. There you go. And for you, Fred the cat fans, that was your Fred fix for this week. Are you going to meow for us, Fred? He's not that sort of cat. He doesn't perform on demand. Oh, no. He's scratching the couch. This is Fred in action, and he's gone back to sleep. All right, so, until next week. You right there, Fred? Until next week, thank you for listening. This is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter @SkepticZone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.